Good morning, Allan Price, and welcome to Berry's Garden. How are you today?
I'm great, Barry. Thank you. Yes. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. And I'm really excited to be speaking to you today and to discovering a little bit about the modality that of body alignment that I believe you practice. And because I understand that people practice in so many different ways, people really have it becomes your own art. I'm really looking forward to unpacking what this means to you.
Body alignment is what we used to call it quite a way back. It's where I began under Dr. Jeff Levine. As time went by, Jeff changed it to life alignment because the work became more profound. So whilst I was in that world, we called it life alignment. I've kind of moved on a little into a different world. Same work, but more advanced. And I operate more in the world of Kabbalah in my healing practice.
I find that fascinating because as we go along and we learn all these pieces, we tend to weave our own tapestry, as it were. We bring all these beautiful strands together and we find a way to make it all work. So why would I come to you? What sort of people would come to you? What sort of questions do people come to you with?
People approach me when they've had obviously personal trauma, when their lives seem to have come off the rails. And often people come to me when everything is going wrong. And that's when I start looking into their places of where they live and their places of work. So the initial detection process is what's going wrong. Are they just feeling bad, feeling down, no energy, feeling ill, or everything's off the rails? Depends. That will determine what process I'll follow. Initially, as we go deeper, it can change.
That's fascinating. Would it be possible for you to talk us through an example, a case study, as it were? Obviously, no names or anything involved, but do you have something that you could give us an example of the work that you do?
All right. I'll tell you a story about somebody in Mozambique. I did a lot of work in Mozambique at one time, and I had to stop, and I'll tell you why later if you like. So one of my visits to Mozambique, the wife of the chief general of the army in Mozambique approached me because she felt that the children were restless and she was restless. And so what began as a simple body life alignment, it got deeper and deeper, and I saw her quite often, and she had to come in secret. Her husband didn't like this at all. And she began to feel really wonderful, but the children were not happy. So I balanced the children, and still they weren't happy. And then came the call at about 1:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. I was back in Johannesburg, and she called me to say that the children were still coming to their bed every night at 12 o'clock, saying that there was someone in the house. Now, that's the first time she'd mentioned to me that there could be problems in the house. I asked her to tell me more about it. And she said, well, the husband got very irritated. He locked the door that night. He put the key where she couldn't find it, under a drawer somewhere. And at midnight, because he was getting very irritated by the children coming into the bedroom and disturbing their sleep. On this particular night, an hour before she phoned me, the children were outside the bedroom door screaming that there was someone in the corridor and they couldn't get in. And he was in a panic, and he grabbed his machine gun and he was about to shoot through the door. And the wife, being more together than him, said, don't do that, you'll kill the kids. And they were running around, and he couldn't find the key, couldn't remember where he'd locked it up. So they called the caretaker, who ran up from the basement like to the 10th floor. And they told him, bash the door down, which he did. That's actually quite amusing, except that there was still somebody in the corridor. So the children came into the room. They called me at 1:30, and I set up a house clearing there and then that night. I need a plan, and I just need them to tell me to go ahead, and I did. And within an hour, by about 2 a.m., the house was 100% clear. They found the key, and the whole family settled down. So it began as a very, and he, by the way, then came to see me quite often. He was then quite convinced. So it began as a very simple, I'm not feeling good, ended as breaking the door down, nearly shooting the children, and me clearing the house.
Wow. So you can work remotely. You don't actually need to be physically on site in order to do what you do.
In fact, when it's house clearing, I only work remotely. I don't want to go into a house like that. It's pretty dangerous stuff. Mm-hmm. And for anybody watching who thinks this is work they'd like to do, take care. It's very dangerous. So I only do house clearing and business clearing remotely. And I've cleared houses and workplaces in Russia, Spain, Greece, Australia, London, Canada, all remote work. And don't ask me how that works. I know what I have to do, but I don't know how these entities know. They must turn tail and run because Price is on their tail. But they go, and it works within seconds.
So tell me about the entities that create disturbances for people in houses. And there's a little bit more I'd like to unpack about that later as well. But really, are these earthbound souls? What causes that?
They range from benign to very malignant. The problem, even with benign entities who are kind of earthbound souls, is that you must not interact with them, and they come into your house. They could be like a grandmother or a lost parent, mm-hmm. and they take your energy. They can only enter our environment, our dimension, by taking your energy. And particularly in Kabbalah, we are forbidden to communicate with these people, these entities. That's at the benign end of the scale. At the malignant, the malicious end of the scale, they're often activated by Shangans, we call them in Mozambique, Sangomas in South Africa, and ex-Mama, or the voodoo Mama, can curse, place curses on a person, a family, a home, and those are terrifying. I have met people or heard from people who've lost limbs, who get seriously ill, they've had kidneys removed. At the malignant end of the scale, it is completely terrifying.
And what are the tools that you bring with you, that come with you? What is the learning that comes with you that enables clearing to happen?
I've been doing this for about 30 years. The two people who are most profoundly capable at this are Dr. Jeff Levine himself and me. What's interesting is we're both architects and we understand space. I don't know what the connection is, except that seems to be one of the elements, an understanding of space. But what I need is simply a plan and an address. Lately, even a Google plan is enough. But ideally, I need a plan of each room and who lives in that room and what it's used for. And I've gone through a long process over the 30 years. In the beginning, it was very complex work. It took me 3 or 4 hours to clean a house, going through a very complex process and using a series of, I'll call them cards, originally developed by Jeff. And over the years, I've begun to develop my own cards. I would wake up in the cards, and in the middle of the night, I would know exactly what I had to do. And I used a lot of sacred geometry, and I used literally the sacred names of God and of the divine. And I used a rabbi friend to double check my Hebrew letters because it's got to be precise. And then recently, I began to be drawn to the work of King Solomon, the ancient king of Israel. And I came across his pentacles, and I sort of drew them myself. I remade them in card. When I say cards, it's because they're about credit card size. I remade them. I used the actual original sacred letters, the sacred Hebrew letters, names of God, and patterns. And it's a lot of work. And I made these cards, and then I meditate on them, and they are so powerful, and it's changed everything I do. Using these, sorry?
No, carry on. I want you to finish that sentence.
Using these cards in another form of balancing I do, which is balancing people's astrology, I find that I can access prior lives, life between lives. And in Earth terms and times, exactly how many years there were between lives, and I can find out what they learned about their coming life that would embed a trauma within them, and I can release it through an astrology balance using King Solomon's pentacles, which I've meditated and activated.
Allan, that's absolutely fascinating, and it's particularly fascinating to me that, as you pointed out, both yourself and Jeff are architects, and therefore understand space, and maybe the spaces in between the spaces.
Yes.
Okay. But what I also want to just come back to the house clearing very briefly, it's not only entities that create disturbance in houses, is it? I mean, I've heard of geological features underneath the ground, for instance, a river running underground or certain mineral deposits can also just be a little bit disruptive to one's energy. And are those sort of things that you would also be able to just to bring into alignment, as it were, for whoever's living in a home?
I call that the bread and butter of my work, the common or garden clearing. The earth is divided into, for example, ley lines about 15 degrees apart. And they go negative, 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 positive, negative, positive, north, like longitude, and latitude, negative, positives. So we live in these grids. Now, a house, a building, any activity taking place on a negative, negative line is itself can be very dark, although there may be no entities. The problem is the earth has a natural frequency. And as you move away from the positive lines toward the negative lines, the frequency lowers, and it becomes very easy to introduce negativity into those spaces. Hitler's lair, as they called it, was on a negative, negative layer line. Exactly. And they somehow knew that.
That's so interesting. So would it be a good idea if you're moving into a new house, for instance, to actually consult with you and say, well, how is there anything that I need to do to balance this house? And do we bring, when we move into a new property, do we bring obviously our own energies in that might need to be aligned with the energy of the house?
Yeah, the answer to your first question is yes. And I have many clients who do, and I work for many estate agents. When a house is sticky and it won't sell, they bring it to me. When I say bring it, they bring a plan. Yeah. And I clear the plan. And usually, in fact, always it sells within 2 weeks. So we must clear spaces, and we must check a new house, and we can bring our own energies. But what's really bizarre is that previous owners can leave behind negative energy, and it remains in the house. A building has a soul. And if the building was loved, by the way, its energy is higher. And if the building is not loved, its energy will decline. I've had so many bizarre situations. I had an architect who came to me in Mozambique, and his house was strangely negative in a particular area. And I couldn't get it. We couldn't solve this. And then together, these two architects, the Mozambican architect and me, we remeasured that house, and we came to a conclusion that there was a certain part of the house which was unaccounted for, a 2 square meter part right in the middle. And he hadn't seen it, and I hadn't seen it. And we found it. And there was a cupboard in front of it. We opened the cupboard. It was filled with AK-47s, automatic rifles used in Mozambique. And that's why I couldn't clear that space. We went more deeply into it and found that it was used as a kind of a lair. They would kidnap young women, store them in the house, pre-sending them off to Saudi Arabia, or let's not use particular countries, sending them off to the Middle East as slaves.
Oh my goodness, that's quite a lot of detective work right there, and
yes,
and that's quite an incredible service that you provide. So, Allan, we're actually coming to the end of our time in Berry's Garden, but frankly, I feel like I could go on chatting with you for hours. And your details are on the screen for people to connect with you. Your email address is on the screen for people to connect with you should they want to contact you to discover what your rates are and what your availability is, and if they have particular things. Is there any one last word you'd like to leave us with?
There's a little story, but it would take about 3 minutes.
Okay, go.
Right. So I worked 1 week in foreign Mozambique, and then events occurred, and I stopped ever working again in Mozambique. And I want this to go out as a warning. I'm on my way to Mozambique some years ago for my usual week's work. About Nelspruit, on a beautiful day on a straight road, a car U-turns in front of me, and I go straight in, and the driver of that car dies instantly. I'm kind of okay, but my knee is snapped in two, and I can't move. And I get taken to the hospital in Nelspruit, and then I get taken by a friend into Mozambique, Maputo, to heal. About 6 weeks later, strangely, my hair had turned solid. I mean very solid, like a lump of plastic. Like if you took rope and you dipped it in epoxy, that's what my hair. Nothing would remove it. Not benzene, not thinners. I cut it off completely. My friend persuaded me to go and visit a Shangaan, which I never do. Outside of Di Williams, I've never done anything like that. Go into the middle of nowhere. There's a little old lady sitting on the floor in a hut in the middle of nowhere. I mean, hours we drove. She begins to shout at me in a foreign language, which I don't understand. My interpreter, my friend, I asked her, why am I being shouted at? She said, you're impolite. You have a bad attitude because, and I said, why? I'll go if she wants me to. No, she said, because you're a Sangoma and it's impolite not to introduce and immediately tell another Sangoma that you're a Sangoma. And I said, I didn't know that I'm a Sangoma. I know I heal people, but that's a strange idea for me. And she settles down and she begins to talk to me through the interpreter in a foreign language. And then she suddenly changes to English in an old Yiddish accent. And I said, and I'm like, whoa. And she said, you are being told never to come again to Mozambique and do your work. And I said, who's telling me this? And she said, your grandfather. And I said, my grandfather who? Philip, she said, all in English, in an old Yiddish accent. And I said, I'm speaking to Philip. We call grandfathers Zeta. I'm speaking to Zeta, Philip. Yes, Allan, you're speaking to Zeta, Philip. You're on your way to Mozambique. The spirits had decided to kill you. And we intervened at the last second because we value your work and you have more work to do. And we agreed that they would take the other man's life and leave yours. And as a sign of how serious an infringement you're making by working with entities or against entities in Mozambique, they left a sign on your hair and they agreed to break one limb only. That's my story. And I decided never again to work in Mozambique. From Maputo, I flew to Cape Town. I went to visit a great Kabbalah friend of mine, one of the 10 great Kabbalists on the planet. I asked him, his name is Arthur, what's going on? What did I do? And he said, Allan, you're like a baby who's walked into the Zambezi River infested with crocodiles. You have no idea what you're up against. don't do that work. And I said, but I do. That's what I do. How do I protect myself? And he gave me a prayer that I must use and never start that work without that prayer. And I thought you'd find that interesting.
I do, and that's beautiful, because it speaks into something that's been coming up for me a lot, which is the remaining in alignment with your Creator and maintaining a sacred practice through whatever it is that you do. So you clearly still maintain a tremendous bond to your Jewish sacred practice,
Yeah.
and that is very beautiful, and that shows me that you're working in the light.
Oh, yes. Yes, because the other side is in Hebrew known as Sitra Akra. There is another side. And I remain in the light because it's pretty scary stuff. But since the Mozambique incident, since my Kabbalah rabbi friend told me what to say, how to pray, how to prepare, I've never had another bad incident.
Bless you, Allan. Thank you so much for sharing with me today. I feel very honored to have had you in Barry's garden, and I look forward to chatting with you another time.
Thank you, Barry.